My name is Maria Walker, and I'm 34 years old. This summer, a caseworker from Child Protective Services stood in my parents' living room and asked my sister a simple question. Why did her 2 children keep showing up at the neighbors' doors, asking for food? And my sister, my beautiful, beloved, can-do-no-wrong older sister Brielle, turned and pointed at me, and her voice cracked with the practiced tremble she's used her whole life to win every room she's ever been in. And she said, "Because she called you. My own sister, she's jealous and she's heartless. And she's always hated that I have a family and she doesn't. And now she's trying to take my babies away from me. That's what this is. That's all this is." And my parents, sitting on the couch behind her, nodded. My mother was crying. My father looked at me like I was something he'd scraped off his shoe. And he said the thing this family had been building toward my entire life. He said, "Maria, you did this. You're the one who destroyed this family. Brielle is a wonderful mother, and you couldn't stand it, so you made a phone call. I hope you're happy. I didn't argue. I want you to understand that." I had spent 34 years arguing with these people and losing, because in this family, the truth was never decided by evidence. It was decided by who Brielle and my parents had already chosen to believe, and they had chosen always decades ago before I could even talk. So I didn't argue. I just reached into my bag and I took out one photograph, and I handed it to the caseworker. One picture from last month, and my sister looked at it, and the color drained out of her face, and she said, That wasn't what it looked like." And then she staggered backward, like the floor had moved, because she knew. She knew exactly what that photo was, and she knew that there was no version of the truth anymore where she was the wonderful mother and I was the jealous sister. Before I go any further, if you've ever been the one a family decided was the villain for telling the truth, take a second to like and subscribe. It helps this story reach the people who need it. And drop your city and the time where you're listening from in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel at night. I'm Maria. This is the story of 2 hungry children. The sister everyone believed was perfect, and the one photograph that finally made the truth louder than the lie. To understand the photo, you have to understand how a family decides, before you're old enough to defend yourself, that you're the bad one, and how that decision can starve 2 children right in front of everybody. There are 2 of us. Brielle is 3 years older, and from the time we were small, my sister was the sun this family revolved around, and I was the weather nobody trusted. Brielle was the golden one, pretty, charming, quick with a smile, the kind of child who knew instinctively how to make adults adore her. And this is the part that took me decades to understand. She was a performer. Even as a little girl, Brielle could cry on command, could turn a moment to her advantage, could rearrange any story so that she came out the heroine or the victim, whichever served her. My parents never saw the performance. They saw only the show. And the show was dazzling, and they loved her for it with a completeness that left very little room for anyone else. And me, I was the difficult one. Not because I did difficult things. I was, if anything, the easy child, the one who did her homework and her chores and never made a fuss. But I was watchful. I saw through Brielle in a way my parents never could, and children who see through the golden child are not rewarded for it. When I'd point out that Brielle had done something, broken something, lied about something, blamed me for something, I wasn't believed. I was scolded. Why are you always so jealous of your sister Maria? Why can't you just be happy for her? Why do you have to make everything into a problem? I can date the exact moment I understood my place in the family. I was about 8. Brielle had taken money from our mother's purse. I saw her do it. I watched it happen. And when the money was missed, Brielle calmly, tearfully said that she'd seen me near the purse. She was 11 and already a master. And my mother, without a second's hesitation, without weighing it for even a moment, believed her. I was punished. I remember standing there, 8 years old, telling the truth, watching the truth bounce off my mother like a ball off a wall, and understanding for the first time that in this house, the truth was not a thing you could win with. The truth was decided in advance. Brielle was good. I was jealous. And reality rearranged itself around those 2 fixed points, no matter what my own eyes had seen. I cried that night, not because I'd been punished, but because I'd glimpsed, young, the shape of the trap I was going to live inside for the next 30 years. That word, jealous, got attached to me when I was maybe 6 years old, and it never came off. It became the explanation for everything I ever said about Brielle. If I praised her, that was how it should be. If I criticized her, even accurately, even when I was simply telling the truth about something she'd done, it was jealousy. The label was a perfect trap. It meant that nothing I ever said about my sister could be true, because the saying of it was itself proof that I was just the jealous one talking. I learned young that I had no credibility in my own family where Brielle was concerned. My word about her was worth nothing by definition forever, and Brielle knew it. That's the part outsiders find hard to believe, that a child could understand and exploit her own sister's powerlessness. But Brielle understood the loop better than anyone, because the loop was her best weapon. She could do anything to me, take anything from me, blame me for anything. And the family's verdict was decided before the facts ever arrived. She spent our whole childhood quietly proving to herself that there were no consequences for her ever, as long as she performed contrition prettily enough for an audience that wanted to be charmed. I think that's where it started, honestly. The thing that would, decades later, leave 2 children hungry. A person who learns young that the performance always wins, and the truth never does, becomes a very particular kind of adult. I want you to hold on to that, because it's the engine of everything that happened this summer. For 30 years, the family rule was Brielle is wonderful and Maria is jealous, and any evidence to the contrary is just more proof of how jealous Maria is. It's a closed loop. There is no fact that can get inside it. And a closed loop like that, it turns out, can be a very dangerous place for 2 small children to be hidden inside. I became a nurse. I think that's not an accident either. When you grow up being told that what you see isn't real, that your own clear eyes are just jealousy, just troublemaking, just you being difficult, you either stop trusting yourself or you build a life around a kind of seeing that no one can argue with. I chose nursing. In a hospital, what you observe is what's true. A fever is a number. A wound is a wound. A child who isn't thriving shows it in ways you can measure and chart and prove. Nobody can tell a nurse that the patient in front of her is fine when the patient is not fine, just because they'd prefer the patient to be fine. I built a whole career in a place where seeing clearly is the job, not the crime. Because I'd grown up in a house where seeing clearly was the worst thing you could do. And it's because I'm a nurse that I knew this summer exactly what I was looking at. That matters. So I'm telling you now. When I started to notice things about Brielle's kids, I wasn't a jealous sister imagining problems. I was a trained medical professional recognizing the specific, unmistakable signs of children who are not getting enough to eat. There's a difference between a kid who's a picky eater and a kid who's hungry. And I know that difference the way I know my own name, the hollow look, the way a chronically hungry child hoards food when they get it, hides it, eats too fast like it might be taken away. The flat effect, the way they stop asking for things because they've learned asking doesn't work. I saw all of it over months in Haley and Tucker, and every instinct I had, the ant instinct and the nurse instinct both, was screaming. But I was trapped inside that 30-year-old loop, because the moment I said a word, I knew exactly what would happen. There goes jealous Maria again, trying to tear down her sister. My credibility had been spent before I was old enough to spell my own name. I was the one person in that family who could see what was happening, and the one person whose seeing had been declared worthless in advance. It is a particular kind of torture that, to have professional training that lets you read a situation with terrible clarity, and to have a family that has pre-decided your reading, is just an emotion. At work, when I flagged a concern about a child patient, doctors listened, charts were updated, interventions happened, because my trained observation carried weight. I'd walk out of a 12-hour shift where my judgment had quite literally helped keep people alive, and I'd drive to a family dinner where that same judgment was treated as the bitter imaginings of a jealous spinster. The whiplash of it nearly made me doubt myself some days. Maybe I was seeing things. Maybe I was jealous. The family had said it so many times for so many years that even I, the one with the clear eyes, sometimes wondered if my eyes could be trusted. That's what a closed loop does to you over 30 years. It doesn't just silence you to others. It starts to silence you to yourself. But then I'd see Haley slip a dinner roll into her backpack when she thought no one was looking, smoothing it down so it wouldn't show, with the quiet, practiced motion of a child who has done this many times. And the doubt would burn away because that is not a thing a well-fed child does. That is a survival behavior. I had seen it in pediatric patients from neglect situations, and here it was at my own family's table, and no amount of being called jealous could make me unsee what my training would not let me misread. If you grew up as the one whose truth was always called jealousy, tell me in the comments. I think being disbelieved on principle is one of the loneliest things there is. Let me tell you about Haley and Tucker, because they are the heart of this, and they are the reason I finally did what I did. Haley is 9, Tucker is 5, and I have loved them since the day each of them was born, with the fierce, slightly desperate love of an aunt who isn't allowed to do as much as her heart wants to do. Because Brielle controlled my access to them the way she controlled everything, as a lever. If I was useful to her, agreeable, if I didn't ask hard questions, I got to see the kids. The moment I stepped out of line, the visits dried up. The kids are busy this weekend. Now's not a good time. Maria, she held those children over me like a key she could turn in a lock, and she knew I'd do almost anything to keep that lock open because I loved them and because increasingly I was afraid of what was happening to them when I wasn't there. And I want to be clear about how deliberate that control was because it's the answer to the question I know some of you are asking. If I could see it, why didn't I do something sooner? The answer is that Brielle had spent years building the exact walls that would keep me from doing anything. She knew I was the one person who might see through her, so she managed me. She doled out access to the kids as a reward for my silence, and revoked it as punishment for my concern. She told the kids things about me. I learned later she'd told Haley that Aunt Maria didn't really like them and was jealous of our family, planting the family poison in the next generation. And behind all of it stood my parents, the great immovable wall ready to crush any concern I raised as more jealousy. To act, I would have to be willing to lose the children entirely, lose my parents, lose whatever fragile place I still had in the family, and do it on the word of a woman everyone had agreed in advance was a liar. That's not an excuse. It's just the architecture of the trap. Brielle didn't only neglect her kids. She'd spent years making sure the one witness was gagged. Brielle's whole public identity for years was the struggling single mother. After her marriage ended, she built a beautiful, sympathetic story. The brave, exhausted, single mom, doing it all alone, sacrificing everything for her babies. My parents ate it up. They gave her money. They got a lot of money, constantly, to help with the kids. Relatives gave her money. There was always a fundraiser, always a hard luck story, always a reason Brielle needed just a little more help to keep her little family afloat. And everyone gave, gladly, because Brielle is a magnificent performer, and the role of the sacrificing single mother is the best one she's ever played. It had everything. It cast her as a hero. It opened everyone's wallets, and, most usefully, it made any criticism of her look like an attack on a woman who was already struggling. Who kicks a single mom when she's down? Only a jealous, heartless sister. That's who. But I started to notice that the money never seemed to reach the children. Brielle had new things, nice things, expensive things. Her nails were always done. There were spa days and weekend trips she'd post about and designer bags and a lifestyle that did not match the story of a woman who couldn't afford groceries. And meanwhile, her kids were wearing clothes that didn't fit, and Haley was hoarding crackers in her backpack. And the last 3 times I'd been allowed to visit, there had been almost no food in that house. Not we're between grocery runs. No food. Empty cabinets. Empty fridge. A child quietly asking if I brought anything. No food. The money was there. It was just going to Brielle for Brielle, while her children went hungry. That was the thing I could see, and no one else would let themselves see. So I did what I could in the only way the family would allow. I started quietly to feed them. I couldn't do it openly. The one time I gently suggested to my mother that the kids didn't seem to have enough to eat, the response had been instant and ferocious. How dare I? What a jealous, hateful thing to say about my sister who was working herself to the bone. Was I trying to start something? Was I happy now that I'd upset everyone? So I learned. I couldn't say it, but I could do something quieter. I started leaving groceries. I dropped bags of food on Brielle's porch when I knew she was out. Shelf-stable things a kid could open themselves. Peanut butter, bread, fruit cups. The kind of food a hungry 9-year-old could get into without an adult. I'd slip Haley cash when I saw her, folded small and whisper to keep it somewhere safe and use it for snacks at school. I gave Haley my phone number on a slip of paper and told her she could text me anytime at all, if she ever needed anything. I was trying to thread an impossible needle, keep those kids fed without saying the thing out loud that would get me cut off from them entirely. I timed the grocery drops for when I saw Brielle's car was gone. Leave the bags tucked behind the planter where the kids would find them, but a casual glance wouldn't, and drive away with my heart pounding like I was the one doing something wrong. Think about how backwards that is, that feeding hungry children had to be done in secret, like a crime, because doing it openly would have been treated as an attack on my sister. That's how thoroughly the family's logic had been inverted. The neglect was invisible and protected. The feeding had to hide. I was sneaking food to children the way other people sneak contraband, because the truth had been outlawed in my family, and only the lie was allowed to walk around in daylight. It was never enough. I knew it was never enough. You cannot raise 2 children from the porch in secret in the gaps your controlling sister leaves you. But it was what I could do without losing them completely. And so I did it. And I hated how small it was. And I told myself it was better than nothing. Sometimes in nursing, you can't fix the whole problem. You can only keep a patient stable until real help arrives. That's what I told myself I was doing. Keeping them stable, waiting for an opening, buying time for 2 children with peanut butter and folded $20 bills, praying it would be enough to bridge the gap until something, I didn't know what, finally broke the situation open. And then, in July, the texts from Haley started coming, and I knew the waiting was over. Because a 9-year-old does not text her Aunt Maria. Are you awake? Tucker is crying because he's hungry, and Mom isn't home. And I don't know when she's coming back unless something has crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. She'd sent it at 11 at night. The next one 2 days later. We ate the last of the food you brought. Is it okay if I ask the lady next door again? Mom said, don't tell Grandma. Don't tell Grandma. My sister had taught her hungry children to hide their hunger from the family. And in that moment, reading those texts, I understood that the porch groceries and the folded cash were finished. That keeping the peace had become the same thing as letting 2 children starve quietly inside a story everyone preferred to the truth. I want to tell you about the neighbor because she's the reason I have proof I wasn't imagining any of it, and because she's one of the few genuinely good people in this story. Her name is Delphine, and she lives next door to Brielle, an older woman, retired, the kind who notices things. And what she'd noticed was that the two little kids next door kept knocking on her door, politely, the way kids do when they've been raised to be polite even in desperation, asking if she had any snacks. At first, she thought it was sweet kids being kids. Then she started paying attention to how they ate what she gave them. Fast, grateful, Tucker stuffing crackers in his pockets for later. And she understood, the way you understand something you wish you didn't, that these children were hungry. Really hungry. Not snack hungry. Hungry. Delphine had been quietly feeding them for weeks, same as me, neither of us knowing about the other. Two women filling in the gaps around a mother who was off doing something else. When I finally met her, Haley mentioned the nice lady next door in a text, and I went and knocked on her door. Delphine and I sat at her kitchen table and pieced it together, and I will never forget the look on her face when she realized I was the children's aunt and that I'd been doing the same thing she had. I thought maybe the family didn't know, she said. I kept thinking, surely if the family knew, somebody would do something. And I had to tell her the truth. The family knew enough to know, and had decided collectively not to know. That's a different thing, and a worse one. Delphine said something to me at that table that I carried with me into everything that came after. She said, "Honey, those babies are not okay. And being polite about it isn't kindness anymore. Somebody has to be willing to be the bad guy." She didn't know she was describing the exact role my family had assigned me at birth, but she was right. And I realized that if I was going to be called the villain, no matter what I did, I might as well be the villain who actually saved the children, instead of the one who kept the peace while they went hungry. I sat in Delphine's kitchen for a long time after that. She made me tea I didn't drink, and she told me, in the plain way of an older woman who's stopped being afraid of anything, about the times the kids had come to her door. How Tucker had once eaten a whole sleeve of crackers standing on her porch, before he'd even come inside, too hungry to wait. How Haley always asked so politely and always asked for something for my brother, too, before she'd take anything for herself. A 9-year-old already practicing the particular self-erasing math of a child who has learned that her own needs come last. How she'd tried, gently, to ask the kids if everything was okay at home, and how they'd gone tight-lipped and frightened because they'd been trained, the way Haley's text had said, "Don't tell." Hearing it from Delphine did something to me that all my own observations hadn't quite managed. It made it real outside my own head. For so long, I'd been the only witness, and the family had made me doubt even myself. And here was this kind stranger, with no stake in any of it, no jealousy to accuse me of, describing the exact same hungry children I'd been seeing. I wasn't imagining it. I had never been imagining it. The relief of that, sitting in Delphine's kitchen, was so sharp, it almost felt like grief. Someone else saw. Finally, someone else saw. That's when I decided to call CPS. And I knew before I dialed exactly what it would cost me with my family. I knew they'd call me jealous, heartless, destroyer. I knew the phone call would end whatever fragile place I still held among them. I sat with that knowledge for one long moment, and then I understood that it wasn't really a choice at all. 2 children were hungry. There was a phone in my hand. Everything else, my standing in the family, my parents' approval, 30 years of trying not to be the villain, weighed exactly nothing against that. I dialed anyway. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting someone who couldn't protect themselves, tell me below what you chose. I know how heavy that phone can feel in your hand. But before I called, I did one more thing. The thing that, in the end, mattered most. I'm a nurse. I know that you don't just report a thing, you document it. For weeks, I had been quietly keeping a record. Not because I'm calculating, because I'm trained. When you suspect something serious, you write it down, you date it, you keep the evidence. Because memory is unreliable, and people lie, and the truth needs an anchor outside of anyone's word. I'd saved Haley's texts. I'd photographed the empty cabinets the last time I was allowed inside that house, with a date stamp on. I'd kept the receipts from the groceries I'd left. And then there was the photo, the one from last month. Here's how I came to have it. Brielle, like a lot of people who are secretly not who they pretend to be, lived half her life online, performing the beautiful version. And one day in July, one of the exact days Haley had texted me that there was no food and Mom wasn't home, Brielle had posted publicly for all her admirers to see a glowing photo of herself. She was at a high-end salon and spa, mid-pampering, holding up a glass of champagne with a brand new designer handbag on the table beside her, captioned with something about treating herself because single moms deserve self-care too. Posted, time-stamped, on the same afternoon her 5-year-old was crying from hunger, and her 9-year-old was asking the neighbor for crackers. I screenshotted it. Of course I did. Because I knew, looking at it, that this single image did something no testimony from jealous Maria ever could. It didn't require anyone to believe me. It required them only to believe Brielle, to look at what Brielle herself had chosen to show the world, and to put it next to the date. Champagne in a designer bag, posted by her own hand, on the day her children went hungry. There is no version of struggling single mother who can't afford food that survives that photograph. The poverty story, either the entire foundation of her sympathy, her funding, her untouchability, turned to ash the second you saw where her money was actually going. It wasn't a photo I took of her. It was a photo she took of herself. That's what made it unanswerable. She couldn't call it jealousy. She couldn't call it a lie. She'd posted it herself, proudly, for applause. I made the call to CPS on a Tuesday. I told them everything, calmly, in the clear documentary language of my profession. The signs I'd observed, the hunger, the hoarding, the neighbor, the texts, the dates. They'd take a report from a registered nurse seriously. An investigation opened, and the family found out it was me almost immediately because Brielle, when the caseworker first contacted her, did exactly what Brielle always does. She went on the offensive and she called everyone, weeping, to announce that her jealous, childless, bitter sister had reported her to CPS out of pure spite and was trying to steal her children. By the time the caseworker scheduled the home assessment, which my parents insisted happen at their house, to present a united front of family respectability, the entire clan had closed ranks. Maria, the destroyer. Maria, the jealous. Maria, who couldn't stand her sister's beautiful family and had finally found a way to try to blow it up. I want to describe the scene in that living room because it was the worst and most important hour of my life. The caseworker, a calm, careful woman named Rosalind, with the unshockable steadiness of someone who has seen every kind of family, sat in my parents' living room. Brielle was there, performing magnificently. The wronged mother, dabbing her eyes, her voice breaking at all the right moments. My parents flanked her on the couch, a wall of support. And there was me, alone, on the other side of the room, in the seat the family always saves for the accused. Rosalind asked her questions gently, professionally. And then she asked the one that mattered. Given the reports from more than one source, she noted, that the children had repeatedly sought food from neighbors, could Brielle help her understand what was happening with food in the home? And that's when Brielle turned and pointed at me and delivered the speech. Jealous, heartless, always hated that I have a family, trying to take my babies. And my father said I'd destroyed this family, that Brielle was a wonderful mother, that he hoped I was happy. The whole room turned to me, waiting for me to crumble or to argue or to do what I'd always done, defend myself, get loud, get emotional, and in doing so prove I was exactly the unstable, jealous woman they'd described. I didn't. I reached into my bag and I took out the photo and I handed it to Rosalind. I want to slow down here because this was the hinge of my entire life, the moment 30 years had been bending toward. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I'd imagined this moment and assumed I'd be shaking, that the old family terror would rise up and close my throat the way it always had. But something about being a nurse took over instead. The calm you find in an emergency, the way the panic goes somewhere else and leaves you very clear. I wasn't a jealous sister making a scene. I was a professional handing over a finding. And findings don't tremble. Second, this was posted publicly by my sister last month, I said. My voice was very quiet and very steady. The nurse voice. The voice that just states the finding. On July the 9th, I can show you the post itself, it's still up. I'd also like to show you text messages from her 9-year-old daughter, sent on July the 9th and July the 11th, telling me there was no food in the house, and her little brother was crying because he was hungry, and their mother wasn't home. The same dates. Rosalind looked at the photo. A glowing woman, champagne, a designer bag, a spa, the cheerful little caption about self-care. Then she looked at the dates on the texts I held out, the small, frightened words of a 9-year-old. Same days. And I watched this professional woman who had surely seen every trick a family can play go very still because the photo did the thing I knew it would do. It took the case entirely out of the realm of he, she said, jealous sister versus wonderful mother, and put it into the realm of fact. There was the money, there was where it went, there was the date, there were the children hungry on the same day. You cannot argue with a calendar. Brielle lunged for it. That wasn't what it looked like. That was a gift someone gave me that day. I deserve to. And she heard herself, heard the words, I deserve, coming out of her mouth in a room where the question was why her children hadn't eaten. And she stopped. The performer in her, who had never once missed a beat in 37 years, finally fumbled the line because there is no line, no version, no spin that turns champagne on the day your child begs a neighbor for crackers into anything other than what it is. And she staggered backward, one step, two, until the back of her legs hit the couch, and she sat down hard because the story she had performed for her entire life had just died in front of the only audience that mattered. And it had been killed by a photo she took of herself for applause and posted with a little manicure emoji. Brielle, Rosalind said, and her voice had changed. Still calm, but with something underneath it now. Something with steel in it. Whose money paid for the spa day? And Brielle had no answer. Because the only true answer was the money everyone gave her to feed her children. The money my parents were sitting right there having given over and over for years. The silence in that living room was the loudest thing I have ever heard, louder than any code alarm I've stood through in a hospital, because it was the silence of a 30-year-old lie finally running out of room to hide in. What happened in the next few minutes, I'll remember for the rest of my life, because it's the moment my parents' 30-year story began, very slowly and very painfully, to crack. My mother had been crying performatively for Brielle the whole time, but now she went quiet, and she reached out and took the photo from Rosalind's hand, and she looked at it. And I watched my mother, who had given Brielle thousands of dollars over the years to help with those poor babies, recognize the handbag. I found out later she recognized it because she'd seen Brielle carrying it and complimented it, and Brielle had said a friend gave it to her. My mother sat there holding a photograph of where her grocery money had actually gone, and something in her face I had never seen before began to come apart. It's a strange thing to watch a person's entire reality break in real time. For my whole life, my mother's belief in Brielle had been the most solid thing in our family, more solid than facts, more solid than her own grandchildren's hunger, apparently. And I watched that solidity develop a crack and then a fault line, right there on the couch, as she looked from the photo to the dates to Brielle and back to the photo. She wasn't performing now. The tears that had been for Brielle's benefit a minute ago had stopped, and what replaced them was worse. A dawning, dry-eyed horror, the look of someone doing terrible arithmetic. I gave her money for food. She bought that. The children were hungry. Maria said. The neighbor said. Haley said. The children, my mother said faintly to no one. We sent money for the children. Mom, Brielle started, reaching for her, reaching for the old magic, the performance that had never once failed her in this house. The tears and the trembling voice that had gotten her out of everything since she was a little girl. But for the first time in 37 years, it didn't catch. My mother flinched away from her own favorite daughter's hand, It was the smallest movement, but I saw it, and Brielle saw it, and it was the first time in either of our lives that the magic had failed in that house, and Rosalind was already moving forward with the practical, immovable machinery of child protection. And that machinery does not care how charming you are. She explained, calmly, that given the corroborated reports, the documentation, and what she was now seeing, the children's immediate safety needed to be assessed, and that they would not be remaining in the home tonight. She asked the question they always ask. Was there a safe family member with whom the children could be placed while the investigation proceeded? And the room, which had spent the last hour treating me as a criminal, went silent, because everyone knew the answer. Everyone knew there was exactly one person in that family who had been quietly feeding those children for months. One person whose number was saved in a 9-year-old's phone under Aunt Maria. One person the kids actually felt safe with. It was me, the jealous one, the heartless one, the one who destroyed this family. I was also, it turned out, the only safe place in it. They brought Haley and Tucker to me that evening. I will not describe to you the state those children were in, because some things aren't mine to put on display, and because they've been through enough without becoming a spectacle. I'll tell you only this. When Haley saw me standing in the doorway, she didn't run to me crying. She did something worse, something that broke my heart far more. She walked to me very carefully, holding her little brother's hand, and she asked me, in a small, polite voice, "Is it okay if we have something to eat? You don't have to make a lot. We don't need a lot." 9 years old, and she had learned to apologize for being hungry, to make herself small so the food would be allowed. I knelt down and I told her that in my house, she never, ever had to ask, and she never had to be small, and there would always, always be enough. And I made them grilled cheese and tomato soup, and I watched Tucker eat 3 sandwiches and then fall asleep at the table with his cheek on his plate. And I sat up most of that night just watching them sleep safe and full in my spare room. And I cried the kind of tears that don't have a single clean feeling in them. Rage and relief and grief and a love so big it frightened me. I kept getting up to check on them, the way you check on a patient you're afraid to lose, the way I'd checked 100 sleeping children in hospital beds. Except these were mine now, in a sense, in the only sense that was going to matter from here on out. Tucker slept with one fist closed around a dinner roll he'd carried to bed, and I didn't take it from him because I understood it. He needed to know there'd be food when he woke up, and his 5-year-old body had found a way to be sure. It took weeks before he stopped doing that. Weeks before either of them really believed the kitchen would still have food in the morning. You don't undo a year of hunger in a night, but you can start. And that night I started, one grilled cheese at a time. That night, Haley said the thing that started to crack my parents wide open, though they weren't there to hear it yet. She was half asleep, and she murmured, "Aunt Maria, you were the only one who ever brought us food. I told Grandma once that we were hungry, and she said I shouldn't tell stories about my mom. And then she was asleep, and I sat there in the dark with that sentence I told Grandma once, and she said I shouldn't tell stories about my mom. My mother had been told directly by a hungry child and had filed it under jealousy and troublemaking, the same drawer she'd filed me in for 30 years. The loop hadn't just trapped me. It had very nearly swallowed 2 children whole, the same machine that had spent my whole life turning my truth into jealousy, had turned a starving child's plea into stories. It was the same machine. It had just moved on to the next generation, and it had almost worked again. The legal part moved with the slow, serious weight these things move with, and I'll tell you the shape of it without pretending I'm a lawyer. Brielle lost the children, not in a single dramatic gavel bang, but in the steady accumulation of fact. The documentation, the neighbor's account, the texts, the photo, the financial picture that emerged once people started actually looking. The support money, the spending, the gap where groceries should have been. The investigation substantiated neglect. The children were placed with me formally with the court's blessing, and Brielle was given the thing the system gives parents in her position: a case plan, a long list of conditions and classes and supervised visits and requirements she would have to meet over a long time to even begin to earn her way back toward them. The legal weight of it was real but measured. This was never going to be the kind of story that ends with someone dragged off in handcuffs. And I'm glad it wasn't, because what those children needed was safety, not spectacle. There was an investigation into the neglect itself, a formal finding entered into the record, the kind of mark that follows a person and shapes what a court will let them do. The custody determination favored me strongly, both because of what Brielle had done and because of what I'd already been doing. The documented months of quietly keeping those kids fed turned out to matter enormously. The same porch groceries the family had never known about became, in a courtroom, evidence of who had actually been parenting these children all along. The system, unlike my family, could read the facts. It looked at the woman who'd posted champagne while her kids starved, and the woman who'd been secretly feeding them for months, and it knew exactly which one to trust the children to. I'll be honest with you about my sister because this story has been honest the whole way. Brielle is not doing the work. People who are genuinely sorry do the work. People who are only sorry they got caught do what Brielle is doing, which is telling everyone who will still listen that she's the victim of a vindictive sister and a corrupt system and a family that turned on her. She has not, to this day, taken responsibility for a single hungry night. The supervised visits are inconsistent. She misses them, then blames everyone but herself. I don't say this with satisfaction. I say it because it's the truth. And because the truth is that some people, when the floor finally gives out beneath the story they've been performing, don't learn. They just look for a new audience. There were consequences beyond the custody, too. The kind that come not from a court, but from a community finally seeing clearly. The relatives who'd given her money found out where it went. Delphine and the other neighbors knew. The story of the wonderful single mother, the one that had funded her and protected her for years, didn't just lose her the kids. It lost her the standing that had made the whole thing possible. The performance only works as long as the audience believes it. The audience doesn't believe it anymore, and that for Brielle is its own particular kind of ruin. Maybe the one that hurts her most, because the admiration of an audience was the thing she'd organized her entire life around. The aunts who used to send her sympathy and money now don't return her calls. The friends who shared her self-care posts have gone quiet. The carefully built image of the brave, beautiful, sacrificing mother, the image that was, in a sense, her real life's work, is gone, and everyone who knows the family knows why. She traded her children's dinners for a performance, and in the end she lost both the children and the performance. There's a terrible justice in that, the kind that no judge could have designed. The very thing she chose over her kids, the shining public self, was destroyed by the same act that revealed her. She kept the champagne and lost everything the champagne was supposed to buy her. The admiration, the sympathy, the unquestioning belief. All of it gone in the time it took one honest stranger to look at one photograph. And my parents. This is the part that's hardest to tell because it isn't clean. My parents did eventually come to understand what they had done, but it did not happen all at once, and it did not happen gracefully, and I won't pretend it did, because the truth is more complicated and more honest than that. At first, even after the photo, even after the children were placed with me, they clung to the wreckage of the old story. My father in particular could not let go. For weeks he found ways to make it partially my fault, partially the system's fault. Anything but the simple, unbearable fact that he had helped fund his granddaughter's hunger and called his good daughter a destroyer for trying to stop it. To accept the truth fully, he had to accept that he had been catastrophically, cruelly wrong for years about which of his daughters to believe. And that wrongness had a cost measured in 2 children's empty stomachs. That is an almost impossible thing for a parent to look at directly. I watched him try and flinch and look away and try again. He'd call me to half defend himself. We couldn't have known Maria. She fooled everyone. And I'd have to gently, firmly say, "You could have known." Haley told Mom, "I tried to tell you for years. You chose not to know because not knowing was more comfortable than believing me." And he'd go quiet because there was no answer to that, because it was true. What finally broke it was Haley. A few weeks in, my mother came to my house to see the kids awkwardly, not knowing how to be there, hovering in my kitchen like a woman who'd forgotten how to stand in a room she wasn't in charge of. And Haley, who is more forgiving than any of us deserve, told her grandmother simply about the nights. Not accusing, just a child telling her grandma what had happened, that Mom would be gone, and they didn't have food, and Aunt Maria's porch bags were what they ate, and she wasn't supposed to tell. And my mother had to sit and listen to her grandchild describe being hungry and being told not to tell in a child's matter-of-fact voice, with no performance anywhere in the room to hide behind. No jealous Maria to blame. Just a 9-year-old's plain account of the truth. And my mother broke. Really broke this time. She came and found me in the kitchen, and she could barely speak. And what she finally said was, she told me last year, she said she was hungry, and I told her not to tell stories about her mother. She told me, Maria, and she couldn't finish it. She put her hand over her mouth and she sat down at my kitchen table. The same woman who had believed Brielle over me for 34 years, and she finally understood that her belief had not been neutral. It had been a wall those children couldn't get past. Her unshakable belief in her perfect daughter had been one of the bricks in the prison. It wasn't really an apology to me yet. It was something more raw than that, the sound of a person's entire understanding of herself collapsing. The apology to me came later, and it came hard and it came incomplete, the way these things really do when they're real. My parents are trying now. But trying after 34 years is a clumsy, painful, halting thing. And I won't dress it up for you. My father still sometimes slides back toward defending himself, still sometimes says, "We didn't know," when the truer sentence is, "We didn't want to know." The sorry gets tangled up with self-justification because fully accepting what they did would mean accepting that they nearly let their grandchildren starve out of devotion to a performance, and some part of them still can't hold the whole weight of that. I understand it. I don't excuse it. Those are two different things. And I've learned to let them stay different. I have not fully forgiven them, and I've decided I don't have to rush it, and I've decided I don't owe anyone, not even my own grieving parents, a forgiveness that arrives faster than it's real. They are welcome in my home, carefully supervised almost, because they're the children's grandparents. And Haley loves them, and I won't take that from her. But the easy, automatic deference I gave them my whole life is gone, and it's gone for good. You only get to call someone a destroyer for saving children once. After that, the relationship is something new, something with a boundary running through the middle of it, and they're going to have to learn to love me across that boundary on my terms, because the old terms nearly cost 2 children their well-being. To fours, here is where we are now, this summer that changed everything. Haley and Tucker live with me. My small house is loud now, and messy and full, and there is always, always enough food. And I have watched over these months the slow, miraculous thing that happens when hungry children finally trust that the next meal is coming. Tucker stopped hiding food in his pockets. Haley stopped apologizing for being hungry. She laughs now, a real 9-year-old laugh. And the first time I heard it, I had to leave the room. They are not unbroken. Children don't come through something like this unmarked. And we have hard days, and there's help, and we're doing the work. But they are safe, and they are fed. And they know all the way down that they are loved without conditions, which is a thing neither of them had ever known. The changes have been small and enormous at the same time. The first time I did a big grocery run with them, Haley stood in the cereal aisle and just stared, overwhelmed, and quietly asked if she was allowed to pick one. I told her she could pick 3. She looked at me like I'd offered her the moon. Tucker has started leaving food on his plate, which sounds like nothing, but for a child who used to inhale and hoard everything in reach, learning that he can stop when he's full, that there will be more, that he doesn't have to defend against future hunger, is its own quiet healing. They've both put on a healthy weight. The hollow look I'd recognized as a nurse is gone from their faces. I chart it in my head sometimes, the way I'd chart a recovering patient. Thriving now. Thriving. the most beautiful word in my profession, and I get to watch it happen at my own kitchen table every day. Haley said something to me a little while ago that I'll carry forever. She said, "Aunt Maria, when you used to leave the food on the porch, I knew it was you. Even when Mom said it was nobody, I knew somebody was thinking about us. That's how I knew it was okay to text you." She'd known the whole time that in a world that had decided to look away, one person was leaving food in the dark because they couldn't stand to leave her hungry. That porch food I'd hated for being so small, it turned out it had been telling her every time, "Somebody sees you. Somebody is coming." It had kept something alive in her besides her body. It had kept alive the belief that she was worth feeding, and that belief is the thing that let her reach out and text me when the worst came, instead of disappearing silently into the lie like her mother wanted. The smallest thing I could do had turned out to be the thread she held on to. People ask me if I feel guilty for being the one who blew up the family, for the phone call, for all of it. No. I spent 34 years being told that my clear eyes were jealousy and my truth-telling was destruction. And I almost let that story convince me to stay quiet while 2 children starved inside it. The thing my family called me, jealous, heartless, the destroyer, was never true. It was just the cost of being the one person who refused to look away. And I would pay it again, 1,000 times, for the sound of Haley laughing in the next room. My sister said I was jealous and heartless. My parents said I destroyed this family. But a family that needs 2 children kept hungry and quiet in order to stay together was never really a family. It was a performance. And all I did, the jealous one, the heartless one, the destroyer, was hand one true photograph to one honest stranger and let the performance finally, mercifully end. The kids eat dinner with me every night now. Haley sets the table. Tucker still can't quite believe there's dessert and asks every single time, "Is there enough?" And every single time I get to say, "Yes, there's enough, there's always enough," and watch his whole face open up. And not one of them, not ever again, will have to knock on a stranger's door in the dark and ask, politely, if there's anything to eat. That was worth being the villain for. It was worth every name they called me, every year I spent disbelieved, every cold look from my father in that living room. I would do it again tomorrow, exactly the same for the sound of 2 children laughing in a kitchen that will never run out of food. It was worth everything,